gonna have to kind of rush through this a little bit faster than I kind of had hoped, but just from the kind of nuts and bolts aspect of just what it is. What it is it's an account of the trial before Pilate that's a little bit more inclusive of people's eyewitness testimony. It actually, the claims that it makes of itself, it kind of makes at the end. It says that that these things were taken from the records of Pilate. So the idea here is that the trials of Jesus before Pilate involved testimonies of people, and some of these testimonies were, on the public record.
Court stenographer, so to speak.
Yeah, and that these things were basically public information on public record, and a lot of these things could have, from the public record, found themselves in the gospel accounts of various sorts, and so it kind of gives the credence, I guess, to these documents, that they were real, that they were firsthand, that they were witness accounts. The kind of the short Reader's Digest version of it is that that Jesus was brought before Pilate, and there were certain kind of miraculous events that were taking place. Like, for example, the standards the soldiers were holding up as he walked in. They were involuntarily, they were trying to hold up these standards, and that the standards of themselves bowed down as he came in. And there was some controversy about that. And then, so that there were strongmen who were chosen to subsequently hold the standards, and he was invited back in again, and the strongmen couldn't hold him either. So already you had...
I want to explain something about that. Is like, this is actually an incident in Josephus, where they actually depicted this in a movie with Gary Oldman playing Pontius Pilate. And was it Jeremy Sisto played Jesus? What was that called? Just called Jesus. That's a mediocre film. I like Gary Oldman's performance in it, but it showed this incident. Yeah, he kind of saves the movie. I mean, I like Jesus movies, but I don't know. I guess maybe they're trying to be more politically correct. I don't know, but I like Gary Oldman's presentation. But there's this incident mentioned in Josephus where Pontius Pilate comes in. Pontius Pilate is depicted in Josephus as a bully. So he's going to put a Roman eagle in the temple, to show this is Roman authority. And the high priest apparently says, you're gonna have to. I'm not gonna allow this to happen. You're just gonna have to kill me. And this is one of the first things he does. We're gonna put the Roman, emblems there, the standards, the eagle. And I guess the concession to the Romans, to the Jewish people, is like there's not going to be, because they're considered idols and they're objects of worship, right? Yeah. They represent Rome as a god. And so the Jews you can have your standards, but not in the temple precincts. So Pilate's like, I'm going to show you using control. We're going to put our Roman standards, our eagle, in the temple precincts. And so they're like, we're not going to let this to happen. You're just going to have to slaughter us, including the high priest and all the Levites. We're not going to let you do this. And the Pilate's like, I can't have this be the first thing that happens when I come in and have to slaughter the high priest and all the Levites, and they're not fighting. They're just saying you're going to you're going to kill us all. So that's kind of a historical background. So you have these standards. They represent the pagan, idolatrous authority of Rome, and that's very interesting as they're holding them up. But the same thing happened, and it seems like, does that seem far-fetched? Well, it happened when Jesus was arrested. Who are you? Are you Jesus? I am. And what happened? All the Roman soldiers involuntarily fell down and prostrate in front of him.
Yes.
So it's very possible that happened. I'm sorry for that.
No, that's okay. That sheds some light on it. There's definitely just the foreshadowings, I think, of the conquering of death. That even the standards themselves, like Satan himself would bend the knee, would, so to speak, would worship him. Let's see. And of course, the trial is a lot like what you see in the canonical stuff. There's some interesting developments. One of these is when Jesus is before Pilate, and Pilate asks him if he is indeed the King of the Jews. And I'll just kind of read this verbatim because it's kind of an interesting little section. It says he went again into the hall and called Jesus by himself and said to him, Art thou the King of the Jews? And Jesus answered and said to Pilate, Dost thou speak this of thyself, or did the Jews tell it thee concerning me? Pilate answering said to Jesus, Am I a Jew? The whole nation and the rulers of the Jews have delivered thee up to me. What hast thou done? Jesus answering said, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, and I should not have been delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from hence. Pilate said, Art thou a king then? Jesus answered, Thou sayest that I am a king, and to this end was I born, and for this end I came into the world, and for this purpose I came, that I should bear witness to the truth, and everyone who is of the truth heareth my voice. Pilate saith unto him, What is truth? Jesus said, Truth is from heaven. Pilate said, Therefore truth is not on earth. Jesus said to Pilate, Believe that the truth is on earth among those who, when they have the power of judgment, are governed by truth and form right judgment. So the idea here is a contrast between what is the earthly truth and the earthly way and that which is the heavenly way. He says that those who are obedient to the truth are the ones who hear his voice. And I know we discussed this the last time we were together, just what is the voice. You know, if the logos, if the word of God has a higher level meaning and a lower level meaning, then those who hear his voice are technically those who hear the higher level understanding. They're ones who can understand parables, in other words. The ones to whom, you know, the ability, I guess, to hear what he's saying with their true ears and see what he's presenting with their true eyes. Because there's a heavenly aspect to him and there's an earthly aspect to him. And what happens to him on the earthly level has a corresponding heavenly meaning. And so, you know, the trial of Jesus is really the trial of the Logos. Yeah. And it forms this kind of parallel. And the idea is that they call down then curses upon themselves. You know, they're going to railroad him, you know, in a trial, and they call down the curse upon themselves. May his blood be upon us and our children, right? Amen. But what they've done is they've presented, I guess, an earthly aspect of Jesus rather than the heavenly aspect of Jesus. And this has come down to us for the last 2,000 years as kind of a generational curse where we see only the physical, but we don't have someone who can really articulate and explain things parabolically and, you know, to speak and to interpret his voice, so to speak, that higher level meaning. There's another section where a Pilate calls the Jews to depart from the hall, and he calls Jesus and says to him, What shall I do with thee? Right? Because he's essentially saying, listen, I'm between a rock and a hard place here. You know, you tell me what to do after all that, you know. And Jesus answers him, do according as it is written. Pilate said to him, How is it written? Jesus said unto him, Moses and the prophets have prophesied concerning my suffering and resurrection. So basically saying, let them do what they're going to do. Of course, the Jews hearing this were provoked and said to Pilate, Wilt thou any longer hear the blasphemy of that man? And Pilate really kind of is eager to punt. You know, we see that in the canonicals too. He wants to send him to Herod because he really doesn't want this to be his problem. Yeah. Let me see. So it goes pretty much into the. There's this controversy, of course. It follows kind of closely the canonical accounts with a few, you know, additions to it for the most part. But there's not a tremendous amount of, you know, difference between them, just more developed in this particular gospel, which I encourage people to read it. I don't know if everyone here has read it. It's about a 2-hour read, you know, or if you're listening to it audio, it takes about 2 hours. So it's really kind of hard to give it its treatment. You get the testimony of the person who was 38 years by the sheep pool, and you get the testimony of the blind man, Bartimaeus.
Talk about Christian movies again. They had this film called, I read The Acts of Thomas a long time ago, and they had a television movie called The Day Christ Died. and I think Prince Humperdinck played Jesus from, was it Chris Sarandon? And it has those, what you're talking about, like those, I was reading, it's like they took stuff from the Gospel of Nicodemus, they put it in the movie. Those people that were healed by Jesus.
It's a great read because, I mean, it kind of takes place in three basic sections. There's the earthly trial, right? And then there's the harrowing of hell, which is, you know, him going into the underworld, which I'm trying to get to. But well, I mean, it's because it's important because it's thematically, you know what I'm saying? What he does is he conquers the underworld. And then, of course, there's the taking of the saints and whatnot into heaven. I don't know if I mentioned this just now, but it's worth mentioning. In Matthew 27, what's the verse? It's where he says that
we should have it on this paper, right?
Yeah, it's right there, like one of the first quotes.
Matthew 27, 50-53.
Where the saints, the rocks were rent, and many of the saints who had died later came out of their graves and spoke to people in Jerusalem. And so I think this particular detail is given to us in the Canonicals basically for this reason, to underscore the truth of the fact that this did happen. You know, he didn't leave it to where this is just in the Gospel of Nicodemus or something else where people could question it. You know, it's basically an article of faith among people who call themselves believers that this actually happened in real life. And the people who give their witness to the harrowing of hell, his descent and conquering of death and Hades in hell, is true. You know what I'm saying? And it's given by these two people. Is it Lucius and Cerinthus, or Lenthius and Cerinthus? Where is it? Yeah, let me read that little section to you because it's kind of interesting how that bears. Okay. So it says here. So Lenthius, and Charinus, were the names of these two. They were the sons of Simeon, the one who took Jesus up in his arms at the presentation, you know, and gave that benediction. Well, these were dead and in the graves, and this is their testimony according to the Gospel of Nicodemus. It says these are, so this is how it starts out. These are the divine and sacred mysteries which we saw and heard. I, Charinus, and Lenthius are not allowed to declare other mysteries of God, as the Archangel Michael ordered us. And it says, for we have only 3 days allowed us from the dead. So it gives a detail that these people were alive for 3 days and then taken up. And so they were allowed to give their testimony. These two in Arimathea also, but the gospel mentions Jerusalem, or the holy city. And so they're there to bear out the story. It says, but what happened was they both of them looked up to heaven, and they made the sign of the cross on their tongue, and they were given to write down their reports separately. And in the end, the two reports were given back, and the testimony that they wrote was word for word, verbatim with one another. So the idea is that they were inspired, and they were inspired separately so that they would be two separate witnesses that what they said was true, and that their testimony was put on the public record, and this is supposed to be that testimony. It says here, and after they had made an end of writing and had wrote in two distinct pieces of paper, Charinus gave what he wrote into the hands of Annas and Caiaphas and Gamaliel. Lenthius likewise gave what he wrote into the hands of Nicodemus and Joseph, and immediately they were changed into exceeding white forms and were seen no more. So, I mean, these are kind of fantastical details, but, you know, lest we forget, of course, we had Philip, who was who disappeared and reappeared physically in another place. That's in the book of Acts. So that shouldn't be difficult for people who believe in the scriptures to see that these kinds of things can happen. Also, when Yeshua was walking with the men from Emmaus, pretty much as soon as they caught on, he disappeared from their sight. So you do have this ability to disappear. That's in the canonical tradition. Anyway, it says, but what they had wrote was found perfectly to agree, the one not containing one letter more or less than the other. And it says, when all the assembly of the Jews heard all these surprising relations of Charinus and Lenthius, they said to each other, truly these things were wrought by God, and blessed be the Lord Jesus forever and ever. And then it says, and they went about with great concern and fear and trembling, and smote upon their breasts, and went away everyone to his home. Which, of course, if you just killed, the great king, and these people have proven to you that they were, sent from him.
I think
Right.
it mentions the Gospel of Luke how people after crucifixion went away mourning. There's this. I'm sure it happened, but I think it's very interesting. There's these stories that Jesus is trying to get to the cross, and there's a frenzy mob trying to rip him limb from limb before he got there. That's not in the Bible, though. That's certain traditions that existed, but the Bible says that when Jesus died, there people saw it and they grieved.
So that's kind of the preface stuff. Now, when you really want to get into the story, let me see if I can find it. Like I said, you really have to read this book. There's tons of these things available on the internet if you just want to listen to it or whatever. You can download the files or listen to them on online at YouTube and other places. But essentially, what happens is the testimony that they give is that, okay, so they're in the underworld. And remember, we kind of spoke about this, there's a literal aspect and there's a metaphorical aspect. Because the book has to mean something in an ultimate sense, not simply in the immediate, proximate sense. It has to bear on things in our lives and things that, it carries with it, in other words, the immediate meaning, of course, and of course the ultimate meaning, or the higher level, if you will, or the deeper meaning. Go ahead.
Can I say something? What I get out of that is, okay, like us, when you get saved, okay, if you're out in the middle of the woods by yourself and you accept the Lord as your personal Savior, that's good. But he says you have to go tell somebody. You can't just keep it to yourself. So that's what I get out of what you just said just now. They had to go, tell people, that they were believers, that they had accepted Yeshua as their Savior, when they got out of, they had to let it be known. They couldn't keep it to themselves to be witnesses to others.
Well, that verse you read, it pretty much, the Gospel of Matthew says that, right? And it says the graves were open, and many of the bodies of saints which slept arose, and they came out of the graves after his resurrection and went to the holy city and appeared to many.
Right.
So that's
what I get out of
Yeah,
that,
so
that they were confessing
Right,
that
that's
they
what-
were believers.
That's what the Gospel of Nicodemus is saying. It's just describing something that's in the Bible.
We're all
right?
his members. You know what I'm saying? Our deeds, if we are in him, are his deeds. And our words, if we speak through the Spirit, are his words. You know what I'm saying? So we are his members in that sense. And if we're not acting, then we're not lending our members, if you will, to him. If we're not speaking, our mouths are to be his mouth. We're to speak with his words, and we are to act with, in his.
Which that's not to say if you're out in the woods and, a bear attacks you or something and you call on Yeshua, you're about to die, you're still going to be saved if you go ahead and die and go into heaven. But, if you can and be around other people, you're supposed to, profess that you're a Christian and tell them, how to be saved and stuff. But if you can, you're supposed to be a witness and tell others about him.
Amen.
Most of us, I think, in our lives have some kind of objective sense that we're in his hands. It isn't all just, believing or whatever. I could point to things, and it would take a lot of time, but I could point to things in my life that I just think are beyond unlikely to have ever happened. You know, things like names and events and just the way things turned out in hindsight and stuff. It's kind of subjective, but if each one of us has miracles or, you know, coincidences that are too hard to explain or whatever happen to our lives personally, it's a little more subtle and a little bit harder to explain, but it's sort of an assurance in your own heart that you're actually walking with him, that he's walking with you. And so, you know, when you speak and you run a risk of, you know, loss or death or whatever, like, you know what I'm saying, like we are suffering like he was talking about earlier, Mr. Mystic, Dr. Mystic over here was talking about how, you know, he's being targeted and persecuted for his own thoughts and beliefs and things that he says, right? All of us as Christians are called to do that because that's the MO of the enemy. The enemy wants to make you feel defeated and to cause you to lose your trust and your confidence in that inner witness that you have, right? But if you speak out, well, I mean, when you look at Saint Stephen, for example, his testimony before men, you know, he knew that what he was saying was going to get him killed.
Yes.
You know, and up until that point, he was willing to trade this world for the next. I mean, at that point, though, and that's another witness because he was looking into heaven and he could see, right? And so just like Lynthia's and Sharina's, also, you know, they had the light or whatever, they had an exalted thing. You see this with Moses and Elijah at the Transfiguration or whatever. You know, we are angelic beings. Stephen was entering into his angelic nature. You know, and it's a revelation too, because these people were all witnesses, like the same people who convicted him, like the crowd and everything, right? They saw the standards, they saw those visible miracles. Many of those people saw, you know, when the people came forward and said, you know, hey, my eyes were open, you know, hey, there were people there. But I think the other flip side of that coin is to recognize that there were people who were willing to condemn him despite all that. And so you learn about the depths of human depravity when you read this. You learn about how evil people are. And and this, to me, you know, I'm not claiming that, you know, I think this is a war between good and evil. All right, and I'm not claiming that people who are in this war are necessarily, you know, messianic figures or, you know, satanic figures or whatever, but you can see that God is working through people and that the devil is also working through people. You know, one of the most wicked things that I can think of is to lie in the face of truth and to deny something that you know to be of God. And, you know, St. Paul or Saul at the time was one of these people who was basically shown to be a despicable character at the time. Because here you have not only the witness of Stephen, which is factually correct, right? Not only should he have listened to the actual logic of it, but in addition to that, he had the face of an angel. And at that point, he was transcendent of his human limitations, and he could see into the spirit. He could actually see into the heavens. You know, and here was somebody who, you know, you hate to have to say it, but he's called out. You know, Jesus says to him, "Why are you kicking against the pricks? Why are you doing what you know what you know is wrong?" You know, and there are people out there who, even though they knew that the dead were brought back to life, that just made that hatred in their heart and that anger and that, you know, their smallness and their pettiness just grow. And so evil people always double down on evil. That's kind of the moral of the story. And we see this in our modern world. You know, some of this, if we did not have that kind of in-your-face, obvious evil of people, some of this might be a little hard to believe. To me, the more I see it out in the world, the easier it is for me to believe that people could have seen him raise the dead and still condemn him. You know, the fact that people are that evil in our world tells me, informs me that they were just as evil in that world. And I think that's what he's showing us too, through the modern sort of parallels to this. Yes.
There are miracles. Look at Balaam and this talking donkey. That was a miracle event. And Balaam still he was still clueless. You know, here is a donkey talking to him, you know, explaining things. And still he is so angry. He is just, you know, he still can't see the spiritual aspect of what's happening around him.
it's funny, you know, but I guess the thing is, it's like, that was kind of the point I was making, is because the kingdom of death and the kingdom of life are at war with each other. The people of the one spirit are going to draw from that spirit, and the people from the other spirit are going to draw from that spirit. Jesus
Yes.
makes this very clear. He says to the scribes and the Pharisees, "You are of your father, the devil, and his will you do," right? And so, as long as the devil opposes God, which is going to be forever, until
Yes.
until such point as he is forced to bend his knee, right, and acknowledge him as the Lord, right? He's going to fight, and his servants are also going to fight. So when you see these people, some of them, maybe their eyes are veiled, but some of these people really embrace evil. I mean, they accept it and they embrace it full on.
Yeah.
You know, and Stephen's forgiveness, if you will, of Paul, I mean, it's hard to prove this scripturally, but it's not much of a leap to think that Paul was chosen because Stephen chose to forgive him, and that God honored that. You know what I'm saying? It isn't impossible to see that as the reason why Paul was saved, through Stephen's intercession, you know, because he did say, "Forgive them."
Yes.
You know, do not lay this sin to their charge. And what was his sin? His sin was putting to death somebody that he not only knew told the truth, but was also manifesting as an angelic nature before him.
Right.
See what I'm saying? And so these people are capable. So I don't put any faith, when I see it in my world, I don't put a whole lot of faith in these evil people ever reforming. I don't think that there's a point at which you can show them or tell them or demonstrate anything to them. They're just not going to listen. They're just not, you know, and you can pray for them like St. Stephen did, right? You can pray for them, and perhaps your prayer, if it's sincere, you know what I'm saying, your intercession can save them. But they're not going to be saved on their own.
God
you
has to
know.
do it, right.
It has to be something divine. And I can say something about myself just as an aside. As a former atheist and somebody who was rabidly atheist, you know what I'm saying, I was very obnoxious, you know, for lack of a better term for it. You know what I'm saying? And I honestly believe that some of the Christians I was going against had prayed for me. You know what I'm saying? That's my honest belief. I mean, I never went back to them or anything.
You
I
made
didn't,
them bad
you know what I'm
enough to
saying?
pray for you.
But I got into enough, you know, debates with these people, let's call them that.
Got in their
you know,
face.
that I, you know, I'm pretty sure that some of them probably got through.
That's why it says to pray for those that despitefully
Yes,
use you.
yeah, absolutely, because that's the only way they're gonna be saved.
It's
You
easy
know what I'm
to pray
saying?
for those
And
that love you, but it's
having
hard
found
for
my
those
way
that
through
hurt
the
you.
other side of that, you know, I have both perspectives in my mind, you know, and I can't believe the person I once was, and yet at the time I thought I was at least sincere about it. I don't think some people are sincere. You know what I'm saying? I think there's a fine line between people who are mistaken, and people who are just bent on being evil. The only way to discount truth is to move it from the objective to the subjective, right? If you can accomplish that, again, you know, that's kind of the Ayn Rand thing again. You know, the moving away from that which is provable, that which is, you know, and society used to be more along those lines. You know, the America that we once had, it wasn't a perfect place. There was racism, there was sexism and stuff. By and large, I'd say we got beyond that because we wanted to. And it still exists, but it always will exist. The thing is, there's no end game. See, with conservatism, and again, not to get derailed from Nicodemus here, but the idea is that with conservatism, everything begins and ends, like I said, it's very simple, right? If you don't put out the work, if you don't put in the effort, right, then you should not, you know, receive it from other people. And not only that, if you don't actually do the work, then you don't act, because everyone's history is recorded, let's say, in the heavens. It exists, like once you've done something, it cannot be undone.
Amen.
So things are kind of written down on the pages of eternity when you do them.
Yeah.
So even what you do in the temporal has its eternal effect, because what has happened will never not have happened, right?
Right.
And so, in other words, so if you've earned something, it has a sort of eternity to it because you actually did earn it. If something is just, you know, bestowed upon you, right, from someone else's labor, from someone else's efforts, then you don't have the actual, you didn't earn it. You didn't technically
My
deserve
friend
it.
Randy,
didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's
Sorry,
all right.
not, have a seat.
Come on. Come
Yeah,
on.
there's coffee and water back there.
Rainy.
Randy, I'm
Dust.
I'm his brother.
What's the seat right here? We're gonna finish up Sabbath school and start the worship service about
Look at the internet.
But
Yeah,
to bring
yeah.
it full circle,
I'm done.
this is the kind of behavior that you saw at the trial of Jesus
Okay.
before Pilate. Because what was objectively true was that he had raised the dead.
Yeah.
What was objectively true is that he had opened the eyes of the blind. What was objectively true is that Lazarus had been dead for 4 days and they were trying to kill him again.
Right.
That had happened, okay? And so what we're seeing is people's ability to then turn around and use agents provocateur, let's say, in a crowd, right? And to mobilize them in a subjective way. Like, oh, crucify him, right? And then just have the people who wanted him dead for their voices to prevail, for their purpose to prevail. And it's the same behavior. It's the subjection of the objective to the subjective. It's the destruction of truth by means of rabble rousing and by means of saber rattling and chants and screams and stuff like that. And you see that paralleled in our world because humanity hasn't changed.
Right.
People will still shout you down rather than let you have your say.
Right.
People will still try to outnumber you rather than have any respect for the objectivity of what it is that you're doing. Right? They're still subjecting the objective to the subjective. Right? And this is what you see throughout the trial of Jesus and throughout his teachings as well. People subjectively did not like him. They did not want him to rule over them. They did not want his teaching. And so they tried to destroy him. Right? And so they're placing their will above the truth. And people who are capable of doing that are literally capable of doing anything, including killing Jesus, knowing that he did the living proof of Lazarus from the dead, he's walking among them, and there's a plot to kill him. Right? There's a plot to kill him again, as if Jesus couldn't raise him again.
To kill Lazarus.
Get rid of the evidence.
But you know what I'm saying? But I would have found that hard to believe. In fact, back in my previous incarnation as an atheist, I did find that hard to believe. People aren't that bad. People aren't that, I was naive, you know what I'm saying? To me it seemed incredible that people could see Stephen turning into an angel literally before their eyes and still stone him to death. But now I believe that. I've seen that kind of behavior among my modern counterparts in this world, and I recognize that they are exactly what the Bible speaks of. That this is a personality type, that this is a spiritual thing that goes on inside of these people. Yeah, sorry.
But you, Robert, who came from hardcore atheism and disbelief, to me, and I had my prodigal time, and that's why I believe that it's incumbent upon us that have our eyes open to truth, to keep praying, to keep planting seeds, to keep, knocking at their hearts.
Well, the last time that we talked about this, we talked about what it meant in the literal sense and what it meant in the spiritual, parabolic, philosophical, whatever sense. I mean, when we use language as human beings, you could read something like Dylan Thomas or Robert Frost, or you could read some of that stuff and you'd say, what does he mean by night? You know what I'm saying? What does he mean by day? Right? The Bible has the same thing. We are not children of the night, right? We are children of the day, right? So in other words, those kinds of things are used metaphorically throughout the Bible. So it's not always literal. If we're talking about the underworld and we're talking about Hades and we're talking about death, and what's the corresponding? The underworld is likened perhaps to Babylon, likened perhaps to the Great Whore. That there are ways in which things are used in different. They're presented in different things, basically as shadows, of greater things, the things that are harder to explain. That they're symbols, they're symbolic. And the underworld has its symbolism as well. Why are they in darkness? Why are they in chains? Well, can you do the works of God when you don't know what His will is? Your hands are chained, right? Can you think the thoughts of God if your mind is in darkness? You know what I'm saying? Can you speak the words of God if you can't understand the words of the prophets? You know what I'm saying? So you have to be able to see that He is both here and there, like He spoke to Nicodemus. He is here on the physical level, but He's not just here. It's like the whole reality Like, truth doesn't have a beginning and an end. Remember, like I said last time, 1 + 1, where's the beginning of that?
Right.
Where's the end of that? It
So,
just is,
one
right?
thing
So
about-
all truth is like that.
Right, one thing about Jesus we have to realize, it's kind of hard for us to fathom, is that there is the idea of the kenosis, right? That he laid aside certain attributes of his divinity when he is manifest in the flesh. But he never ceased being omniscient or omnipresent or any of those things, even when he was.
That's
He
not-
laid aside those attributes, but they were still there, right? He didn't stop being
In some of
God.
the infancy gospels, for example, he speaks, from
Right.
the cradle, from the from his very inception,
Yeah.
right? And of course, the natural mind has a hard time believing that. But the reason why that information is given to us, I believe, is to demonstrate the fact that he is the same yesterday. When he grew up having full knowledge of everything. And so that's why you keep seeing him going from teacher to teacher, from Levi to, the different teachers that taught him in his youth, right? He knew, everything from beginning to end and was able to put them in their place. And just in case anybody doubts that, that's told us in Luke as well.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, first of all, Satan got kicked out of heaven because he tried to overthrow God
Yeah.
and take over heaven.
Right.
And part of the angels,
Third of
a third of them that got kicked out with him. So he's down here and he's mad, and so he's trying to get everybody to follow him, and as many as he can. So he doesn't want Christians to witness to anybody. He doesn't want anybody to go to heaven.
Right.
So they're gonna try to take as many to hell as possible.
Well, it's not through his efforts entirely, though, because when we act in disobedience, right? What does Jesus say in Revelation? He says, "I will kill her children with death." I'm not, Jezebel children, right? He talks about time was given to them and stuff like that. So Satan's not 10 feet tall. He's just doing what he's allowed to do because of our own disobedience.
Right.
And what does it just say? What's the constant refrain? If we will turn,
Yeah.
right? If we will listen, if we will hearken to him, if we will do his commandments, right?
Yes.
Because the thing is, Satan only has that power because, in a way,
We say yes to
in
him.
a way, yes, we like to indulge in our pleasures, and we like to indulge in our anger, and we like to indulge in all of the things that appeal to the flesh. The
Yes.
lust of the eye and the lust of the flesh.
Right.
And the pride of life. All of those things appeal to us. If you're not gonna take your seat at the lowest spot, you know what I'm saying, and be, to lose your life, you know what I'm saying, then you have pride in you.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And those things have to be rooted out. And the way that those things get rooted out is we have to see them and recognize them. And unfortunately, the way that has to happen is that evil has to manifest itself. So there you have the mystery of iniquity. Because of that, we have wickedness in this world. But again, we are also said that it is also told that we may speed his coming, right? And what does it say? I mean, that's in 2 Peter, and it's very formulaic. You add to your faith knowledge, and to your knowledge perseverance. You know what I'm saying? And so it's given to us. And he says, if you do all these things, then an entrance will be open to you.
Yes.
Right? And you'll be able to speed his coming, right? So there's an end game,
Yes.
right? And what is that end game? You know what I'm saying? Is to open your mouth and allow your mouth to be his mouth. To lend your hands to the Lord and let your hands be his hands,
Yes.
right? To give your heart to the Lord so that your heart reflects his heart, and give yourself
Yeah.
over in your nature. That's what Stephen did, right? I mean, he opened up his mouth and just let it on out. And it cost him his physical life, right? But again, his intercession for Saul, like I said, there's not this direct connection, but it doesn't take, a genius to see that Saul was not really on his way to this, place. You know what I'm saying? And Stephen said, do not lay this to his charge,
Right.
right? So he saw something in him, and probably other people there as well, that I feel like that the Lord respected that. And that, he's like, here's a person who basically did what he was supposed to do. I'm going to honor that. And I think that Paul, or Saul turning to Paul, was that, was that honoring of his, wish. But, that's the thing. You got to face down evil by being the light. You got to face it down by being the truth. You got to face it down that way. You just try to oppose it. You try to oppose anger with anger. Well, Satan can't cast out Satan. You know, you try to you get bitter about what he does. He's trying to make you bitter. He's trying to make you angry. He's trying to push your buttons. That's his game. You can't win his game using his rules.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
All right,
So-
so we're gonna have to wrap it up.
But anyway, read the Gospel of Nicodemus. It's full of all this metaphor. It's full of all this teaching and stuff. He's broken those chains for us. He's given us that life. You know what I'm saying? And it's up to us, to walk in it and to come out of the grave, so to speak, and to testify to the people of the holy city.
Amen.